Hello and welcome to the Society with Fatma Shaheen at PTV World. The global theme for this year's 16 Days of Activism Against Gender-Based Violence, which runs from the 25th of November to the 10th of December is Unite, Activism to End Violence Against Women and Girls. Now, in line with this very theme and of course in line with raising public awareness on the issue of gender-based violence as it does exist in the Pakistani society, today we'll be talking about this very issue as it does exist not only in Pakistan but worldwide too. We'll be talking about the various forms in which it does exist. We'll also be talking about the hidden scars that it does leave on, of course, people who are subjected to the same. We'll also be talking about the various laws and the policies and various interventions which Pakistan has taken so as to address this social menace. And last but not the least, when we talk about, of course, addressing this issue from a global perspective, what are the ideal global solutions to the same? This and much more to follow on today's show. Let me introduce you to my today's panel. My first panelist for the show today is Ms. Hafsa Mazhar, who's a gender expert. Assalamu alaikum ji and welcome to the show.
Walaikum assalam ji. Thank you.
You're most welcome. Alongside her, I have Professor Dr. Imran Ejaz Haider, who's a consultant psychiatrist. Assalamu alaikum sir and welcome to the show.
Walaikum assalam. Thank you very much.
You're most welcome. And my third panelist for the show today is Ms. Iman Khan, who's a youth activist and she's also a social worker. Assalamu alaikum ji and welcome to the show.
Walaikum assalam. Thank you for having me.
You're most welcome. Now, to get the conversation started with you, madam, we understand the fact that when we talk about, of course, violence against women, this is an issue which, of course, is looked at in a different way in different societies and, of course, in different cultures. But fundamentally, when we talk about its root causes, they essentially remain the same. So as, of course, somebody who's diligently worked, on the issue of violence against women, that too for, of course, more than 2 decades, what reasons do you attribute to gender-based violence, more so in the context of the Pakistani society?
When talk about the violence, I think in Pakistani society, the gender inequalities and deep-rooted stereotypical attitudes and cultural barriers, these are the key factors which are contributing in gender-based violence. And along with that, this is a male-dominating society, and the women and the girls who are, living in the deprived areas, especially, they are behind the time, and we need to, work with them to empower them at the moment. So, but other than that, there are policy matters as well, which are contributing. Especially the implementation is lacking. At the moment, there are a number of laws available, but no implementation and no implementation mechanism. These are the key factors.
Right. So it would be poverty then, and it would be lack of implementation of the laws that we have, in your view.
Yeah.
But madam, also I think it's also very pertinent to mention here the fact that, when we talk about various humanitarian crises, when we talk about war conflicts, when we talk about, climate-induced disasters, all these are instances where we see that, cases of gender-based violence, they are on a rise. And I think in this regard, we've also seen there to be, an increasing number of cases being reported during the recent, catastrophic floods that Pakistan has also witnessed.
This is really concerning for the civil society, which is actually working, and the UN agencies who are working to empower women and protecting women from the violence. Whenever the calamities happen, it increases the gender-based violence. So it has a relationship with the calamities. That
right.
Because when the people are living in the camp setting, so this is very easy for the people to access them, and rape cases increases, child marriages increases, and this is also happening in Pakistan as well. Right. That's why during the COVID, the GBV was declared as the shadow pandemic,
right,
which is same for the current situation in Pakistan. Big number of women,
not only in Pakistan, madam, but worldwide, because we did witness that, the COVID-19 pandemic brought with it, of course, a surge of violence against women cases worldwide. On which, sir, I'll come to you. I think we must also, of course, talk about this entire issue from the view lens of course, women inflicting violence on women, because I think always we talk about it, males being the perpetrators, whereas, of course, there's no denying to the fact statistically that, males do it more often, but at the same time, we cannot even ignore the fact that, women also inflict violence upon women. So, as of course a senior consultant psychiatrist in your own right, what are the trends that you see, and how often is it that you see cases come to you in which you see that women complain that they have been basically targets of violence, or they've been victims of violence because of women inflicting violence on them?
Yes. Okay. Thank you very much for asking this question. I think it's mainly like we were just mentioning that during the pandemic area, I think the stress level goes very high. And because you're confined in a smaller spaces, and especially, so there the stress level leads to the violence especially to the younger girls, number one. And number two, as you know, from the basis of our society, it's usually we have a culture here that the mother-in-laws are inflicting more violence towards the daughter-in-laws, which we need to actually disentangle, whether it's really from one female to the other, or it's because of the reasons of the daughter-in-law actually exploiting or whatever, having the family affairs and leading to the violence. So it's mainly usually the younger females, they do come and they complain about their mother-in-laws. And during the pandemic, it really had risen to a degree that we could not handle this issue. So the only thing which we could do is that we do the individual counselings.
And of course, by that virtue, we must not ignore the fact that, we've also seen this increasing, very welcoming trend of online counselling too. But sir, when we talk about, that typical mindset that people have, that perpetrators have, whether they are male, whether they are female, what is that typical attitude, what is that typical mindset that you come across as a psychiatrist, which you actually attribute to such crimes? Because I think there's this general notion in the society that, the more educated you are, the lesser your chances of committing such crimes.
It's very hard to pinpoint actually about the mindset that which prevails from the upper end of this society to the lower end of society. But usually, if you see, the predominance is of the dominance, whether it comes from the female or whether it comes from the male. That if there is a mother-in-law in the house and she said whatever she wants to say, whatever she wants, that should be done. That simple as that. And similarly, if we convert it to the male element, the male says, whether to his wife or to the daughter, whatever she says, it has to be done. So dominance is the
dominance, and also I think at the end of the day, power play. It's a case of basically power dynamics being exercised.
Next comes the power play, and like we were saying just now, that it's a male egoistic society. And females are usually taken as that they are here just to help us. They are here to feed us in terms of cook for us and do the household chores. They do not give the due respect. So that mindset of dominance and belittling the females is the cultural aspect of our society, especially in Pakistan, which is predominant.
Right. So at the end of the day, if you're not complying with the given societal guidelines, with the given societal socio-cultural norms, then of course you become a subject of criticism, and in some cases, like you yourself said, violence too. On which I'll come to you, Iman. I think your narrative on this, of course, as a young person in Pakistan is extremely important. So as a young person in Pakistan, do you feel that, younger women, just by being young, they are more vulnerable to violence per se?
Yes, definitely. They don't have as many safe spaces to talk to. When you're older, you can do things yourself, but when you're younger, when you're between 16 to 19, if you can't have these conversations with your parents, it doesn't really help. So you can't file an FIR without your parents. You can't do something about the situation. Take any action, basically. And if you can't complain about it, if there's so much taboo to talk about this, there's basically nothing happening.
Right.
And you're so vulnerable. Likewise, if, for example, you're married at that certain age, or around when you're financially dependent on your husband, then I think it's a ball game entirely. It's a different ball game.
I think then the dynamics change. But I think completely. To the extent of young people, it's very important to mention, for the benefit of the audience, that even in UK, similar studies suggest the fact that women aged 16 to 19 years are more likely to experience intimate partner abuse. So I think generally we see this to be a rampant issue for the youth per se. But moving on, I think it's very important to talk about the issues that you raised, that, the support that young people are seeking, they don't, more often than not, they don't get from their families or from their parents at the end of the day. Because a lot of times I've also seen in my own practical experience that, when girls, they do want to complain, their parents say that, why are you using the internet to start off with? Why are you using Snapchat? Why are you basically doing this? So at the end of the day, I think it becomes more of a victim blaming kind of a thing. So as, of course, a young person out there, what solutions do you propose to the same? Because, at one point we need to address these issues where, of course, we are calling out people who cyber harass or cyber stalk women, but at the same time we need to do it in a manner in which, of course, women, young women like yourself, they are not forced to give up on their online spaces.
I agree. So when we're specifically talking about cyber security and cyber harassment, cyber bullying, we need to know that Pakistan now has a department that actually helps women, women and men, to counter these problems. I had a personal incident where a friend was being harassed by someone anonymous, and we couldn't find, she couldn't go to her parents. She came to me, we went to the department. The department did help. We figured out who it was, who was blackmailing her.
Right, Iman, your point is noted, on which I'll come to you, madam. I think we must also, of course, talk about the very important, definitions of abuse, because I think a general misnomer which does exist in the Pakistani society is that whenever we talk about abuse, whenever we talk about violence, it is just physical in nature. So for the clarification of the audience, tell us that when we talk about violence, how does it precisely also cover emotional abuse? How does it, also cover financial abuse, even, abuse which has, of course, a psychological impact?
Yeah, Fatma, the gender-based violence is a broader subject, and when it comes to the gender-based violence, so violence has a different shapes, like you said, that it's emotional, physical, and economic violence as well. It covers all, but abuse and sexual exploitation, harassment, these are also different forms of the violence that being covered under gender-based violence whole definition.
Right.
But this is a broader definition. We also need to understand each term separately as well, because the harassment doesn't mean that bullying and being a very vocal and being loud with anyone. This also covers not only giving using abusive language, but also making someone uncomfortable. That is also harassment. That is, and when we talk about the other forms of violence, like physical violence is torture and any kind of physical harm that harm other person. Other person can be men, women, transgender, anyone, child can be. And when it comes to psychological violence, it actually is a broader term as well, and it covers making someone really tense with their action, with their expressions, with their words. So it's not only harming anyone with their physical actions and
with kind of an affirmative action, because you're very right, madam, when we talk about, of course, harming somebody by way of omitting to do something, like for example by ignoring somebody, by perhaps coercing them to do something, by perhaps for that matter isolating them. That is also something that would amount to violence, which a lot of people very conveniently ignore. Sir, how common is it when we talk about such cases? I think quite a few which madam has been kind enough to comprehensively deliberate upon, that how frequently do such cases come to you? Because I think when we talk about violence, gender-based violence, physical violence, or any other violence, those are the cases which we often see even on TV channels and otherwise being talked about. But what about those cases where people are being abused by being controlled, by being coerced to do things that they don't want to do? Are these a common occurrence in Pakistan?
Yes, they are actually, but the main issue is that the females, they usually come with the symptoms of anxiety and the symptoms of depression. They don't come with the complaints of that they're being abused at home, there is a history of violence going on, or there is a kind of like isolation, especially the females are not allowed to meet their parents or their siblings after marriage, for example, or if there's a young girl who has been on the internet with somebody, so the family has confined her to one room, and she's now suffering from depression, she's not eating, she's not drinking. So that is the reason they are brought to a psychiatrist or a psychologist.
Right.
But once we start probing, and I think yes, mostly is there is a kind of a violence or an abuse going on, which even I think both the perpetrator and the victim are not even aware of it.
So I think these are the types of abuse about which, of course, we need to make people aware, about which we need to sensitize people at the end of the day. But so moving on, when we talk about, of course, comparing and contrasting about women, opening up about such issues, how open do you feel are they? Because, over a period of time, this is something which she earlier also mentioned, that, we see that, conversations about violence, conversations about harassment, they have been opening up in the Pakistani society. So if you were to make a comparison, which is that category of women in the Pakistani society who is more open to talking about the same?
I think it's the females who are educated and those are and the ones who are working at the moment. This is less than 1/3 of the start of the females who come to us and they can openly talk about the violence. But rest of them, I'm really I think I would say it's very, very hard for a female to open up and say that she is being suffering from violence. To be honest, whenever we ask any question like this, how things are at home, how do you feel? The only answer which I get, and I think most of my colleagues of psychiatrists, I'd say, they all say everything is fine at home. There is no problem. So when we start digging them up, yes, exactly, they are suffering from the abuse.
So, but I was also saying that, you know, there are some statistics which shows the fact that if you were to make a comparison between a woman who is young as opposed to being somebody who's middle-aged or perhaps, you know, elderly, it is of course, you know, the younger person who would come out and talk about it perhaps more openly as opposed to somebody who's older. So how do you explain that? Because I would think, when I look at this from an objective bystander viewpoint, that, you know, with age comes experience. So of course, when you're experienced, you identify violence more quickly and you are more open to talking about it. So psychologically, how would you explain elder women being more silent about such abuse?
I think here comes the point which you were mentioning earlier. It's about the mindset of the females, because it's the mindset that if once you are married, you have kids, you have to stay there. Despite you're facing a kind of violence or abuse going on. And second is the element of dependency. The females are not empowered or have the security if they leave that relationship, and they can't move in the society, because then the society starts talking about her, and the society actually pinpoints that female. So this is another stigma. So I think these are the few reasons that she tends to keep quiet. And she does not want to leave that relationship. And especially in our culture, if they have got few kids, she says, I'm old enough now it's the time for my kids to get married. If I leave this relationship, what will happen? So it's a big, big issue.
Right, sir, your point is noted. On which I'll come to you, Iman. Do you agree with what Dr. Saab is saying? Because I at least feel that when we talk about the younger generation today, younger people, by virtue of their education and of course by being, you know, sensitized by media, more specifically by the social media, they are more open to talking about, you know, violence.
Yes, because you have this platform, you have social media, and you can vent it out completely, and there are very less judgments because everyone is just being themselves, or they're being very open, and that's true. But yes, when it comes to women who are married and who are financially dependent on their husbands, when you know that your husband will be the only source of income, that he is the only medium through which your kids will have food on the table, women don't talk about their abuse, regardless of how bad the situation is. You don't have another option. And I think a major contributor to why women, especially of elder ages, can't complain about it is because a lot of their parents and their guardians expect them to normalize the husband's behavior. So they will say this dominating nature is in a man's personality. It is they actually normalize this conversation, hitting, controlling, stalking, harassing, whatever.
They validate it basically.
They validate it, and when your parents aren't understanding it, where your relatives are understanding. I think it's just not the parents, Iman, it's the society at large, because, you know, when society validates something, of course, you validate it in your head.
You validate it in your head.
You stay in that situation.
And when you complain about it, you feel at the end of the day, maybe you are doing something wrong. But madam, when we talk about, you know, moving away from social norms, and we talk about the laws, of course, we do see that, you know, Pakistan on paper has a lot of pro-women laws, be it laws relating to harassment, be it laws relating to violence. The constitution is, of course, very clear when we, you know, talk about gender equality at the end of the day. But when we talk about their implementation, what issues exist? What kind of social barricades exist when it comes to implementing the same laws?
Before commenting on that, I wanted to contribute to the earlier conversation, because there is a lack of awareness, and on the you know, older age women, what is the main reason they are not making the gender-based violence unacceptable? Because this is so much deep-rooted. They internalize that notion that, and they feel that this is quite normal, and this is not making women uncomfortable in the society in general. So this is also contributing factor, because they are not making it loud that gender-based violence is unacceptable. And it is also related with the laws as well. Through the laws, there is a lack of awareness at masses level. Although the younger generation is more aware as compared to the other, but there is a digital divide. We also need to understand that. So there are a number of issues regarding to the lack of implementation of the laws. The laws and the policies are providing framework overall to protecting women from women and the other gender from the violence. But the framework is there. But there are a number of issues like there isn't adequate budget available and resources are not allocated according to the requirement, so that the structures and the measures should be there to provide these facilities. Like I will talk about like the Violence Against Women Center that is being developed under the law of women protection law that was passed in 2015 and amended in 2016. The center was established in Multan only, and there is any center available in all the districts of Punjab when we talk about the Punjab districts. So the law is not being implemented other than Multan.
Although
So
the law, if you study it, it's a very progressive law, in line with the laws that we have in the West per se. And then, you know, we've also seen that the definition of harassment, that again has been actually widened. And when we talk about, of course, you know, the laws which address cyber security, cyber harassment, those are very clear, very pro-women, at least on paper. So I think implementation is something which we definitely need to work upon. Sir, you wanted to add something to that?
Yes, I think it's a very valid point. Like they have only one center in the whole of the Punjab. And now you see, if you go abroad anywhere, like you go to USA, you go to UK, and if like there was a kind of a COVID campaign going on, so if you're traveling on an underground, on a bus, anywhere on the TV, you always see the advertisements about it, and they try to educate the people. And I think I'm very surprised that if you talk to females here, they don't know about this law. They are not even aware of it, that this law
think
exists.
that is, sir, also part of the problem, because there is lack of awareness on not only part of the females, also on part of the males at the end of the day. This is the reason because of which we can't actually, you know, implement the laws. On which, sir, I'll actually ask you a very pertinent question. Now, when we talk about, of course, you know, improving our treatment towards women and of course addressing this issue of violence, they very famously say that, you know, it's not enough to treat women well, it's important that all men treat women well. So when we talk about implementing these laws, when we talk about, of course, addressing this issue of violence against women, how particularly do you feel can we sensitize men in this regard?
I think if we address this issue directly, it will be a bit difficult, because keeping in view that it's a male egoistic society. But obviously we need to create an awareness. We need to create an awareness for the respect for the females. We need to create an awareness that the abuse should be stopped and the violence should not be going on. Maybe a person, the male person is aware of it, or whether he is not aware of it. So what we tend to do is that if a female comes, which again, this is a whole blanket on top of her saying that everything is fine, and because it's the way our young youth or the daughters are brought up, that not to complain, not to say anything. So we tend to, when we dig up the things, we then tend to request them that if they can come for the marital counseling. Some do agree, some don't agree. And when it comes to the children, then we tend to call for the family therapy. And once things do start cropping up, then we start discussing about the violence, and we introducing the terms of abuse and how they can handle the issue. So in that aspect, few men, they do agree, and they do tend to change.
So moving on to what you said, I think a very important narrative of today's discussion should also, of course, be geared towards, you know, treating the perpetrators, especially those who commit such crimes, those who inflict violence. Now, a lot of times we see that there's too much focus on, of course, you know, getting the victim help. But in civilized societies in the West, we also see that there's an equal focus on, of course, you know, treating the perpetrator, you know, especially if they are mentally unsound and they are committing such crimes at the end of the day. So as a psychiatrist yourself, when, you know, such people do come to you, people that is who inflict violence upon others, how do you treat them? Because I'm sure that must be a very challenging task.
I think it's a very important question, because the foremost important thing is that the male do not agree to it, because A, I think they are not aware of it, and B, because it's a male egoistic society, they don't want to say that, yes, I'm wrong and I'm doing the wrong thing to the female. So the element starts from the female actually, and when we try to dig in the history, and if there is an element of abuse going on, or within the both the male and the female partners, we try to call for the marital therapy. And second, if it goes down, if it trickles down to the children, then we tend to call for the family therapy. And once they sit together, and small things do then tend to come up in the form of abuse or in the form of violence. And I was just listening to the conversation. I think mostly the females, they complain that the husband, they don't come, when they come back home, they don't talk to them. They don't listen to them. That's also another form of abuse, I think. They say, oh, fine, I'm doing all the work for my wife, I do all the work for my children, what is to talk to them, or I don't want to discuss about my job aspects with her. So we tend to start from this conversation, let's sit down together, you both sit together and start having a conversation. So I think this kind of way of approach we use just to bring up the concept of violence and abuse, and we try to address it indirectly. And I think men do change, they do acknowledge.
Coming towards you, I think a very important question which then also arises in this regard is that when we talk about, you know, these increasing incidents of violence, we also see that at some level or the other, they are related to people's exposure to violence as they do see it on television screens, as they do see it on social media. So at the end of the day, Iman, do you feel that when we talk about media violence has that potential to increase your likelihood of becoming violent?
I actually disagree with this because, for example, boys, they play PlayStation or they play games, but very violent games, and there are studies on this. There is actually not a lot of link between you watching violence, even in media or through your games or whatever you do. But I think it's the course of life that it takes you, you know, how you're looking at life, your perspective on it, and how you're balancing your emotions, how you're managing your rage, how you're managing your anger, how you're controlling your body and your bodily needs. That I think is not linked to the media. That I think is a very personal choice, and as you grow up, you make these decisions as a human, as a man. And when, you know, violence, I feel, is something according to your brain, how your brain is
something very subjective. But I would respectfully beg to differ, because I remember this very famous case which came up, and Dr. Saab, I think you would agree with me on this, of a 14-year-old who actually killed his entire family playing this violence game, which was actually inciting violence. But then I think at the end of the day, what you mean to say is that, you know, you also have to process the kind of emotions it kind of stirs inside you, so that you stir a balance. But I think for that itself, you need to be very mature.
Majority it doesn't affect, but I think it's the like you were saying earlier on, that it's the upbringing of a male or a female, and once they see this kind of all the Netflix programs and they see the violence, they are intrigued about it. So there is a streak in them. They want to do something, and that starts with an experiment. It's just like a drug addiction. You start with socially. Like your friend says, just give it a try. Even you say no, I don't want to do that. A, because of religion. B, because of the family issues. But they try it once, second time, third time, and then they become it.
Right.
So it is, I agree with you.
I
it's
think
a very
it's
rare
a combination
thing.
of different factors at the end
yes.
of the day, because, you know, we can't pinpoint towards one thing in black and white, because otherwise then you can't explain cases. But madam, coming towards you, since of course, you know, the show has an international viewership, and since of course this is an international issue that we are talking about, international social movement, so to speak, I think it's very important that we talk about Pakistan's international commitments when it comes to, of course, you know, doing away with violence. So at an international level, what are the treaties that Pakistan has ratified, and to what extent have we been successful in actually, you know, complying with the provisions of the same?
Right. So there are a number of treaties Pakistan has signed, starting from the CEDAW, which is a convention for ending all kind of discrimination against women, that Pakistan signed. Then the SDGs, Goal 5 is also focusing on gender equality. Along with that, there are other treaties, which is the conflict and war areas, the 1325 conflict of UN Charter, that is also, you know, referring to the war crimes and gender-based violence crimes in the war. So these are the main treaties, but other than that, we are doing so many things, very progressive laws there, and there are a number of very good initiatives, like we are going to amend the law, protection law in Punjab, that is going to be implemented at one go. Darul Amans are going to be converted in the Walk Center, and the law will be implemented. That amendment is in progress at the moment. And other than that, there are very good initiatives the government has taken. The Ombudsperson office has been established to, you know, take
they have quite wide powers to take up harassment cases too in that regard. And then we also have, of course, you know, toll-free helplines where people, more particularly women, can call in and they can get their, you know, different queries answered. And then we also have that very, I remember that very interesting app, which was Women's Safety app, which was of course a project of the Punjab Safe City Authorities. Basically, I remember. In this regard, sir, I think it's also very important that we talk about, of course, the very important, rather the very pivotal role of mainstream media in this regard too. When we talk about, of course, you know, improving the efficacy of implementation of the various laws, policies, and of course, you know, Pakistan's international obligations in this regard, what role do you feel can media play in this regard?
I think the media has a very important role in it, and I think I was just thinking that there are so many Islamic scholars, they come on the TV, and it's usually run 24/7. I think if we start advertising from the empowerment and the gender equality from them, I think it's a very good message we can give across. Especially also the main thing is that the dramas which are being made in Pakistan should also show the empowerment of the females and the respect of the females. On the contrary, there is a violence, there is a degradation. So that also creates
violence doesn't need to be glorified there, right?
So that also helps. So I think the media has got a very vital role,
Right.
especially in Pakistani culture, because we all see the movies all day. So that helps a lot.
Sir, but we cannot ignore the fact that there have also been, movies which have actually highlighted, which have won Oscars for Pakistan, which have highlighted very prevalent social issues in the country, and which have not only won Oscars, but they have also had the impact of actually bringing about changes in our laws. I remember that honor killing movie, which was made by Sharmeen Chinoy. And then, of course, we have seen quite a few dramas, them being socially motivated too, more so at least in the last, I believe, 5 to 10 years. So I think over a period of time, whereas of course there is definitely more room for us to, show women in a more progressive, in a more positive, and of course in a more strong light. We do see that, slowly and gradually Pakistani dramas are actually, making that shift. But coming towards you, Iman, I think we must also of course talk about this very important work that you are doing in the capacity of course, a young person in the country, the purpose of which is not only to make people aware about their rights, but also to financially empower women. So tell us more about this work, what is the scope of this work, and how particularly does it aim to address the issue of gender-based violence?
So we're running an organization in which we're trying to inform women of their legal rights, of their inheritance rights, of their property rights, of what to do when they go through domestic abuse or juvenile abuse or juvenile harassment, rape. For example, how to write an FIR, how to behave when something has happened against them. Also, we're trying, I think something that's very specific is we're trying to give them a mental health counseling, especially after they've gone through such trauma, and how to process it and how to make better life decisions after you've been through it, rather than being dented for the rest of your life. When it comes to financial empowerment, I feel it's really important for women to be financially empowered to counter domestic abuse. Especially if you're stuck in a situation, you need to be financially independent to get out of it. Especially if you can't, depend on someone else and just be in that situation.
That's very rightly put, because a lot of times we see that women don't walk out of relationships or marriages for that matter because they are financially dependent on the abuser per se. But madam, coming towards you, and of course to wrap up today's show, I think a very important part of today's show is of course the fact that wherever we talk about of course women being victims of violence, it's also very important to talk about them being survivors too. So at a very basic level, how do you propose can we teach women, how can we teach young girls to be the heroes of their own stories?
There are two elements of that. One is the victims. We are not saying them the victims, we are saying them the survivors. The survivors has to stand up and they break the silence. And secondly, whoever their family members, their friends, their colleagues, they should stand with them, because this is really very, very important. We should break the silence and make it necessary to report case whenever it happens. So this is normally people are reluctant because it's a social taboo, and when it comes to if you have reported a case and you are going to live a normal life, this is really difficult for you, because for me, if I am raising a concern, the society is not accepting me as a normal person. And secondly, they are not, they are making me a victim and penalizing me, creating problems for me. So we also need to work on the behavior change in society in generally, so that the survivors who has been raised that issue, they should become the hero, not the victim
of the story. Because at the end of the day, I think unless you ensure that they have that support, a lot of times women, they want to speak up against abuse, they want to complain, but they don't do it because they feel that they have a lot to lose at the end of the day. They'll be stigmatized, and one way or the other they will be victim blamed for it. So I think these are the societal attitudes that we do need to change. But sir, coming towards you, what what role can mental health care professionals like yourself play when it comes to changing these societal attitudes? Because a lot of times we see that, women who are subjected to violence, they come to you, and then at, by the same yardstick, you also, if not that often, sometimes, or for that matter rarely, also get to treat those men who actually subject such women to violence too. So when we look at this issue from, of course, a more holistic lens, what role can professionals like yourself play when it comes to, ensuring that we do away with the social menace?
I think you must be aware that all the schools here now have got the facility of on-site clinical psychologists. And I think if it starts from there, we're educating from a very younger school age, especially 8th class, 9th, 10th class, or the O-level, A-levels. I think it starts from that to educating the young girls, both young boys and young girls. And then if it goes up to the universities and to the colleges, again we have a facility of the clinical psychologists there. And I think if we start giving the information, we can hold up seminars there, we can hold up workshops there, small skits in which they can show that how to respect the female empowerment, how to identify abuse and violence, and how to even raise voice.
Right.
And like Iman was just saying that, and there are laws, and I think our younger generation is not aware of it. Even if they're aware of it, I think they do not know what process to follow,
right,
and how to approach the issues. So I think if educating at this level, I think then there will be a drift or a shift in the society.
Right. So by that virtue, I think we need to work on then two things, two things that you did propose. One, of course, revamping the curriculum so as to make it more, sensitive to such issues, so as to educate, children at a very young age about
Yes.
gender-based violence. And number two, to, of course, empower and to, of course, ensure that, educational institutions, they ensure that, such incidents of violence, they don't go unchecked if they do occur within the educational institutions premises.
Yes.
On which I'll come to you, and of course to conclude the show with you, Iman. I think it's very important that when we wrap up today's conversation, we also talk about the young generation which is subject to, violence. So what would your message be as a young person in the country to all the young women who are watching our show, that, when it comes to being subjected to violence, why is it so important for them to seek help? Why is it so important for them to break the silence?
Women should really understand the strength of saying no, and just by that they can create destroy generations of abuse and violence. And I think firstly they should understand their boundaries, they should figure out the red flags, and they can do this by understanding behavior patterns. For example, if your partner or if your brothers are degrading you, abusing you, violating your privacy or anything of the sort, you need to know when to say no, you need to tell them off and then create a boundary. And in that way, women, when you have this strength, when you know you can say more, you will know that you will make change for other women also.
Right.
For example, if you are standing up for yourself, you will tell your neighbors, or you'll tell your sisters, you'll tell your mothers
and
to
even
be strong.
if you don't, categorically tell them, the mere fact that you have stood up for yourself, the mere fact that you have spoken up for yourself, that in itself will be, of course, a big motivation for anybody who is being subjected to violence at the end of the day. Because I think at the end of the day, it has, kind of a trickle-down effect. On which note, I would like to conclude today's show. Thank you so much, Madam Hafsa. Thank you so much, Dr. Saab, and thank you so much, Ms. Iman, for being here with us today. Well, to conclude today's show, we generally spoke about violence against women. We also spoke about, the various laws, the policies, and of course, the interventions that Pakistan has taken, for that matter, so as to address this very issue. What remains to be seen is, of course, the level of effectiveness of the same, because, implementation is still a very important question mark. Also, something that we need to focus upon as a society is the fact that, at any point in time, we cannot justify, we cannot excuse, gender-based violence per se. And last but not the least, if we as a society are serious about doing away with this issue, then it's very important that we aim to make women safe in their own very households, because until and unless a woman is safe in her very own home, she can't, actually aim to be safe when she's out there in the public spaces. On that note, signing off for today. Until next time, take care and Allah Hafiz.